Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host, our favorite co-host.
The only co-host. How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well, and today we're going to talk about Syria once again, but Syria's in the news again. And you know, last week, especially when the plan was, and we heard the announcement that they were going to let loose for the bombs, and we couldn't tell what's going to happen and what's Russia going to do. It turned out, you know, the event was a little bit of a fizzle in the sense that nobody got killed. Yeah. And it looks like Trump was trying to appease both sides, the hawks and the doves, and he didn't want to kill people, and he tipped off Russia. So it was a PR stunt. But I don't think, well, it wasn't benign because it could have been very dangerous. But what we're talking about today is the consequence of what happens to that. And there's several consequences of what comes when you bomb a country. I would think almost any country, but in this particular case, the so-called bombing to teach them a lesson and tell them who's in charge. But there was a couple of headlines on this that drew attention to things that are going on there, because Syria is far from being settled, even though the Syrian government and the Russians are sort of getting things under control, and our government's a little bit frustrated overall because we've aligned ourselves with Al-Qaeda, and they don't want to give up too soon. But the headline had to do with the CENTCOM chief, Joseph Votel. It was announced that he is having a secret meeting in Israel. And they said it was unusual because they don't have these kind of meetings, and why was it secret, and who decided to let us know? It looks like Israel might have thought it was to their benefit to know what was going on. But the big discussion has to do with weapons. You know, that the Russians might put weapons in Syria. Well, of course, there's plenty, but turning weapons over, turning the S-300 over, which, as I understand it, is a defensive weapon. Why should anybody be opposed or get excited about a defensive weapon? You know, if you had, they probably should get more upset with drones. They're more likely to attack somebody than the S-3000. So if somebody's upset, it would be Israel, and Israel's the one that may well have called for this meeting, because Israel's saying, you know, this is not going to happen. We're not going to put up with them being able to defend themselves, because they have carried out quite a few missions already in Syria, probably in the hundreds for the best we can judge. Yeah. But it's never mentioned. That's not in the news. So this looks like the negotiations are going on, and maybe they're trying to sort this out before the weapons are delivered. But I cannot believe that this is going to prevent the transfer of these weapons. I don't think Russia is all of a sudden going to back down. If they think it's in their interest to protect Assad and also their base, I think they're going to do it.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing because, you know, the Syrians have already asked for it. I think they've already paid for it or partially paid for it. And for political reasons, the Russians have avoided it because, of course, the Israelis are very upset about the possibility of Syria getting S-300s because, as you point out, they've gone on about 100 bombing runs against Syria. And what they like to do is they like to shoot through Lebanon into Syria. And with the S-300s, it would have an increased range of protection of their airspace, so they would be able to engage Israeli aircraft if they come through Lebanon to try to attack. So it is a big deal, and Russia has been very careful this whole time to try to maintain good relations with Israel. It always has tried to maintain good relations with Israel, and this could be a pivotal point. That's one of the reasons we wanted to talk about it. We saw this piece in Zero Hedge that we thought to ourselves, this is kind of an unintended consequence. If Russia says, okay, if you're going to have these attacks, then we're going to have to provide these weapons. It would be sort of ironic in a way.
Yeah, and you know, in the real sense, there's not a whole lot of difference who shoots the missiles. They're Russian missiles. But diplomatically, I guess, and who can make the excuses, Russia does not want to shoot these weapons off, and they want to give them to Syria. Syria is defending their country. But nevertheless, I think it's a serious thing that's going on, and Israel doesn't back down easily either. If they decide it's in their interest, of course, I've always maintained over the many years that we shouldn't be taking sides in any of Israel's fights. You know, they have their problems, they have their defense to worry about, and we shouldn't be picking sides, but that's a far cry from what we do, because we're very much on one side versus the other. So this may be an escalation. I think Trump was hoping for the best, dropping a couple bombs and let them know that we're still there, we're tough people, and not to do anything, we didn't kill anybody, and make everybody happy. It may turn out that not very many people are happy. It just might motivate even more people, because some people suspect that this whole episode is moving, everybody, not everybody, but Iran and Turkey closer to Russia, and there's an alliance now developing for defending Assad.
Yeah, that would be an unintended consequence. But the S-300s to Syria, I think, is really potentially a flashpoint. And I just had a couple of quotes on it. And here's what Netanyahu said to Russia when the issue came up again. Quote, "We will destroy your missiles if you deliver them to Assad." End quote. Israel considers it a red line. And here was Russia's response. If Israel destroys anti-aircraft batteries, it would be, quote, "catastrophic for all sides." And then again, the Israeli Defense Minister Lieberman said, quote, "If someone shoots at our planes, we will destroy them. Doesn't matter if it's an S-300 or an S-700. End quote. So really it is a war of words. Now what will happen, I don't know that anyone knows, and I suspect this is why General Votel was in Israel.
You know what that reminds me of is that Israel's saying, don't shoot at our airplanes even if we're trying to bomb you, because that would be an act of aggression. Yeah. Remember the thing in Iraq?
Yeah, exactly.
One person said, we have to go to war against Iraq because they're shooting at our airplanes and we're bombing, and the act of aggression was defending their country. So, there's another story too, having to do with Erdogan, that he is upset about us sending in more weapons, to northern Syria. 5,000 trucks loaded with weapons, and this isn't to help Assad. This is once again claiming that they can recover more territory. I think in one way they've given up, maybe not given up, but at least now backed off with saying, every single day the only thing we're concerned about is working for that day that Assad is gone. I think they sort of assume Assad's going to be around for a while because they have to defeat Russia to do it. But in the meantime, they're lining up where will the final lines be. And I think this is what they're deciding, and who gets the oil, and what land we're going to control. Where is Turkey going to come in on this? So this 5,000 trucks would be, in northern Syria, and of course, Turk's main concern are the Kurds.
The Kurds, which the U.S. is arming. I think what the U.S. is trying to do, and its partners actually, interestingly enough, on the 22nd of April, France said that we're going to build a new Syria. So the French are in there, supposedly French troops on the ground there, but I think they're trying to create new facts on the ground. And there's a lot of, the U.S. has suspended any aid to any government-controlled areas, but they are delivering aid to areas that it controls or its proxies control. So I think they're trying to build those up, create new facts on the ground, and get their regime change. I think this is the neocons on autopilot, just continuing through regardless of what Trump says. But I saw a report earlier today that the U.S. is setting up yet another military base in northern Syria with a 1.5-kilometer airstrip, the ability to house 1,200 troops. So despite what Trump says, despite what he promises we're getting out, it looks like we're actually getting further in.
Yeah, probably. He does talk about bilateralism. That sometimes sounds good. Now, the one thing that has happened here is that Turkey is drifting away from NATO and going toward Russia, which may be a significant event. And Trump doesn't seem to oppose that, as long as he can sort of control NATO and all. But he talks about bilateral agreements and bilateral, talking with other countries. But there's this movement toward Russia means that Turkey's moving away from NATO, and that might not be all bad. I don't know what the intended or unintended consequences will be, but maybe a good unintended consequence would be is the undermining the stature of NATO. Just think of how much trouble we've gotten into everywhere from Ukraine all down to Eastern Europe and what's going on here. And when we want to go into Afghanistan, we get the rubber stamp from NATO said we can go in there. I believe they use NATO excuses in Libya, and this sort of thing. So maybe that would be good, but I don't think we can depend on Trump as being becoming a non-interventionist. He might say some nasty things or say, well, we can get out of NATO or something, or ignore them, or we'll make them pay the bills. But I don't think he's quite there. But maybe reality will set in that NATO will lose some of its stature because Europe can turn into a real a chaotic area of the world, whether it's the economic system there, the migration, and also the challenge coming from Eastern Europe and from Russia. So it's hard to predict what all the unintended consequences would be, but so far I don't think that bombing has led to anything that we can say, oh, this is a wonderful thing. He didn't kill anybody. And everybody says, well, maybe the war is over. But I don't think that's the case.
Well, especially with that carrier group steaming toward Syria. You made a great point that I hadn't really thought of until you said it, which is, after the run-up to the bombing, we didn't hear anything about NATO. It was just the U.S., UK, and France. After the bombing, we didn't hear much from NATO. Stoltenberg said, I'm all with you. I approve of the bombing. But it really very, very obviously was not a NATO exercise. In fact, the Germans said, we don't want any part of it. We will refuse to participate. The Italians said, we refuse to participate. Those are leading partners in NATO. So it is very interesting. The German foreign minister, I think, said yesterday, we need Russia for a political solution in Syria. We shouldn't isolate them any further. So that is an interesting unintended consequence that NATO has sort of fallen by the wayside.
Which would be good. And then there's now talk about realignment, and they talk about the three countries coming together more so, although they've had to deal with each other for a long time. And that is a much closer alliance with Turkey, Russia, and Iran. Mm-hmm. And they all have different interests. They don't agree on all the issues, except they're ready, in order to do this, they have to, and Turkey is more or less pressured to go along with this, is not target Assad, and just, trying to preserve what is left of Syria and Assad. So, but this alliance is something that is significant, and once again, it relates back to NATO. The stronger this alliance is, the weaker NATO would be, especially with Turkey fading from it. I don't think that's really happened under NATO, where one person really just gets sick and tired of it all, and all of a sudden goes to the other side.
And they're trying to buy Russian weapons too, the S-400s. I would just say in closing, if we're ready for that. One of the things that doesn't get discussed very much, when you add in the costs of those 100 and some missiles, when you add in the cost of keeping the aircraft in air, when you add the cost of moving the ships around, this operation cost us about $1 billion. $1 billion to make a point, to not do anything strategic or even tactically important, but simply to make a point. And we talk about that a lot on this show, how money is wasted. It does nothing to protect us, make us safer. Here's $1 billion really just flushed away. Unless you own Lockheed Martin stock, you are worse off after this bombing run. So we should think about that. The final word is I'm looking forward at the end of the week to seeing as many of you who are going to Charleston. We're essentially sold out. I believe there are a handful of tickets left, but essentially it's sold out. So another Dr. Paul and a great track record so far of our selling out each conference.
Well, sounds good. Looking forward to it. I'm coming. Is that true? I'm invited?
You are going to be there.
Okay. Well, I want to just finish up by making another comment about this triple alliance. And to me, it's sort of interest because it is anti-ISIS and anti-Al-Qaeda, which isn't that what we're there for? That's what they tell us. We're there. So, but the real, the important part is this Triple Alliance is actually challenging United States policy. That's what they're doing, and they're challenging it. And you say, how can that be? Well, it just happens, and we've mentioned this many times, and a lot of people know it and understand it, that we're closer to being the allies, so-called for practical reasons, with ISIS. And that is the real tragedy of all this, that we spend all this time and all this money just supporting our enemies. But this is a truism. You know, over the years, I was always voting against foreign aid because I always figured it never got to the right people. And too often, the weapons turned around, they were used against us. That is still the case. And I think it happens in the Middle East. Al-Qaeda ends up with our weapons, sometimes by accidents and sometimes on purpose. So it just makes the argument, the strong argument, the important position that we have and that I think more people should consider is non-interventionist, mind our own business, bring our troops home, trade with people and talk with people. I think the world would be a better place in which to live. I thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.